Good morning. Thank you for joining, and I appreciate my colleagues joining me here today as well. We want to start with the heartbreaking loss of innocent life at the grade school in Nashville. 3 children and 3 staff dead, and a community changed forever. Gun violence is the leading cause of death for American children and teens. The leading cause. Not one child needs to die. We must pass meaningful gun safety legislation and need to look at every possible way to do so. We must give families the peace of mind to send their kids to school without fearing for their lives. But we need reasonable Republicans to come to the table to make this happen. It's an outrage that we can't find a handful of Republicans. Republicans are willing to put people over extremism on the far right. We also send our condolences to the people of Rolling Fork, Mississippi, who lost their loved ones. House Democrats, under the leadership of Benny Thompson, stand ready to support these communities as they look to rebuild. We're proud to be joined today by Representatives Seth Magaziner of Rhode Island and our newest colleague, Jennifer McClellan of Virginia. This week, House Republicans are wasting the American people's time on H.R. 1, the Polluters Over People Act. This bill is a job killer. It will repeal sections of the Inflation Reduction Act, which over the course of 10 years will create 9 million jobs. Over 100,000 good-paying American jobs have already been created, with more on the way in clean energy and manufacturing. So instead of using the majority to help hardworking Americans get a little bit of breathing room, House Republicans want to cancel those paychecks and stall the progress of those industries that will shape our economic future and help us compete with China. And despite these claims to the contrary, H.R. 1 would do nothing to lower costs at the pump. In fact, when Democrats held the majority, we took on oil and gas companies that engaged in price gouging. House Republicans want to reward them. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has already called this bill dead on arrival. The president had issued a veto threat. So this is another political stunt from House Republicans who have shown an inability to govern. Vice Chair Ted Lieu.
Thank you, Chairman Aguilar. My heart goes out to the families and victims affected by yesterday's mass shooting in Nashville. The victims included 3 9-year-olds. I also want to commend the brave law enforcement officers who responded to a mass shooting and by our accounts ran towards gunfire and killed the shooter. We're asking law enforcement officers to run towards AR-15 weapons. You cannot support weapons of war on our streets and support law enforcement at the same time. That's why we need to take action to prevent gun violence. And what did House Republicans do? Well, they had a hearing scheduled for today in the House Judiciary Committee, in which I sit, that was going to make it easier for people to get pistol braces that can make AR-15s even more deadly. And what do Republicans do? They canceled the hearing. Now, why would they do that? If they honestly believe, as they say, that arming more Americans with more guns, more AR-15s, more pistol braces would make us safer, they would have held a hearing and had that as a solution. But they didn't do that. They ran away. They ran away and they're hiding because they know that the talking points they're spewing are simply not true. Giving everyone more AR-15s and more guns does not, in fact, make American society safer. Because if it did, they would have had that hearing, had the debate, had the argument, and did the markup of that bill. Cowards. Oh, I'm now going to introduce Congressman Seth Magaziner, who is going to talk about H.R. 1. And prior to Congress, he was the general treasurer of the state of Rhode Island. Seth? Great.
Oh, good morning. I'm here as a member of the Natural Resources Committee to talk about H.R. 1. But first, let me just say that as a parent of a 1-year-old, I know that when I get home to Rhode Island later this week, I'm going to hug my son a little harder, thinking about how there are parents in Nashville who aren't going to get to do that again. And we cannot let this become normal. Gun violence is now the leading cause of death of children in this country. That is not normal. More children killed by gun violence than by automobile accidents. It didn't used to be that way. It's not that way in other parts of the world. We cannot normalize this. We cannot let the Republicans continue to delay action on common sense gun safety bills. And we stand ready to work with anyone in good faith that is willing to put children ahead of the gun companies. But I'm here today primarily to talk about H.R. 1, the Polluters Over Peoples Act. And as a Congress, when it comes to energy policy, we have two jobs. Number one, to make energy affordable for consumers. Number two, to protect the environment. This bill does neither of those things. It does not lower costs for consumers, and it does not protect our environment. If the Republicans were serious about doing these things, they would have voted for the Inflation Reduction Act last year, which made historic investments in clean energy, which also opened the door for more conventional energy. They voted no, every one of them. The Inflation Reduction Act also had $1 billion in it to improve agency staffing to speed up the permitting process for energy. They all voted against that too, because I guess it had Joe Biden's name on it, and that for them was more important than lowering costs or transitioning to clean energy. If you want to talk about lowering energy costs for consumers, we have to talk about the fact that the oil and gas industry made $300 billion of profits last year, not revenue, profits. ExxonMobil made $6 million a minute. The profits of the big five oil companies alone were equivalent to $600 per American citizen last year. So if we're going to have a real conversation about lowering costs for consumers, we need to talk about the runaway profits that the oil and gas industry is making, price gouging American consumers. But of course, the Republicans don't want to talk about that. Why? It might have something to do with the $23 million that the oil and gas industry contributed to Republican campaign accounts last year. And that doesn't include their support of dark money groups. $23 million. They took $23 million to protect $300 billion of profits. I think the Republicans should have held out for more. They sold themselves out too cheap. But this bill will roll back important environmental protections. It'll do nothing about the fact that the oil and gas industry is sitting on 9,000 unused leases because they want the prices to stay high. That's the bottom line. They want to make it easier to circumvent environmental regulations, get more leases, and sit on them unused to keep prices high. So that's why, as a caucus, we oppose this bill. That's why every Democrat in the Natural Resources voted against it. And that's why we know it's dead on arrival in the Senate and the White House. And with that, I want to yield to our newest member, who I'm very excited to get to know, from Virginia, Jennifer McClellan.
Good morning. I am Jennifer McClellan, and first I want to send my condolences to the families of those killed in the shooting in Nashville yesterday. I am really struck that as we have been debating parental rights here and across the country, the number one right parents should have is the ability to send their children to school and not worry about if they'll come back. If you look at not only how many children have died because of school shootings, but those who have been traumatized as they've watched their friends die, or as they've had to endure drills that often traumatize them just as much as an active shooter incident, enough is enough. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. Congress needs to take action. As a mother, I also have deep concerns about Republicans' H.R. 1 and its potential impacts on our national deficit, hardworking families' pocketbooks, and the health and well-being of historically marginalized communities. The Polluters Over People Act would be disastrous for our national deficit, ballooning it by $2.4 billion over the next 10 years. and it'll do so to pad the pockets of corporate polluters who are already, as you heard, enjoying record-breaking profits. H.R. 1 is the Republicans' flagship legislation, but it blatantly disregards the financial interests, health, and well-being of American families and rewarding polluters with shameless giveaways. The Polluters Over People Act would repeal major cost-saving programs implemented through the Inflation Reduction Act, including a $4.5 billion home electrification rebate program that is designed to lower energy costs. It would repeal the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which will accelerate the deployment of clean energy technologies and create thousands of good-paying jobs. The repeal of these programs will raise costs for hardworking Americans, rob them of quality, family-sustaining jobs, and jeopardize a healthier future for our children and grandchildren. H.R. 1 doesn't even reference clean energy, even though clean energy is the cheapest form of energy. And the Polluters Over People Act would completely undermine the bedrock environmental protections, curtail impacted communities' ability to provide public feedback, and drastically reduce their options for legal avenues of recourse. It would remove agencies from impacted communities and silence historically marginalized and underrepresented communities in favor of corporate interests. My predecessor, the late Donald McEachin, fought to preserve environmental protections and review laws because he believed every community deserved a seat at the table. I'm proud to build on his legacy and stand with House Democrats to oppose the Polluters Over People Act. And we will continue to fight to preserve the environment while protecting the health and financial security of Americans. And now I'll turn it back to Chair Aguilar for questions.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jennifer. Questions?
Yesterday, your entire caucus joined with Republicans to pass the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for harvesting organs of live prisoners of conscience. If you could speak to why it was important for you all to vote yes to pass that.
As a part of the organizing calendar for any week, we seek out, as we always do, to work with Republicans to find common ground on issues that help our communities, help our country, and send the right message on human rights. And this was one of those bills that came out of committee, was a suspension bill. Members thought that it was the right thing to do. We still believe that, highlighting that the human rights abuses in the CCP engages in, and we're going to continue to try to find common ground where we can. Nothing is going to change, and that's just part of the suspension calendar and the legislative efforts that we undertake each week.
I know there was the hearing on TikTok that was last week. A couple of Democratic lawmakers do have their own TikToks. They are actively posting on it. Have you had any conversations with them about the national security concerns that might be at risk, or asked them to maybe stop posting or consider deleting their accounts?
No, I haven't engaged in any conversations with those members. My presumption is those are personal phones. Government phones are not allowed to have that application. I think what's more important to highlight out of that hearing is the importance of colleagues on both sides of the aisle asking tough questions, having a mind toward the health of our communities and the health and safety of our young people. That's similar to where we start when it comes to gun violence protection, gun violence prevention. Wanting to make sure we have safer communities, but the social media companies are not exempt from us having conversations about safety. Clearly, there have been national security discussions as well associated with the data that company has in their possession. What they choose to do with it, or what they are asked to do with it, has been a focal point among policymakers on both sides of the aisle, on both sides of this chamber. But we're going to continue to have those discussions, and I trust that the Energy and Commerce Committee, as well as other committees, will continue to engage in that in the weeks and months ahead.
If I could just follow up on that really quickly. I mean, right now I know the focus is on TikTok, but some of the privacy concerns that you've mentioned go across the board, including to US social media companies. Does Congress really need to kind of pull back and look at sort of everything instead of just focusing on TikTok?
I think Congress has. Look, we have the ability to walk and chew gum at the same time. And you saw the prior Congress talk about privacy legislation. We weren't able to get it across the finish line, but a robust discussion in committee that the vice chair serves on, and I'll ask him to comment specifically. But these are, I'm sorry, in Energy and Commerce, but the Judiciary Committee also has these conversations as well. Look, the importance of this discussion isn't lost on any of us. The protection of people's personal data. I'll tell you, as a parent of two teenage boys, the expectation and the presumption of that data is a little different in the coming generation, and that's something that we have to navigate. But there clearly are public policy implications, and we're going to dig in and have those conversations as a caucus and as a Congress.
And he answered it well.
Thank you. I just want to follow up quickly to Emily's first question on TikTok. It seems like a lot of the members that are overly supportive of it seem to be more in your progressive wing. Do you have any thoughts on that, or if there's an ideological divide in terms of what is supported?
No, I think that this has less to do with ideology and more to do with generation. These are also members that have campaigned recently, won campaigns, have platforms and engage, constituents and people across the country using some of these social media platforms, a little more adept at it than I am personally. So I trust that that's how the environment that they were raised in. And part of the reason why they came to Congress is to engage and to have these discussions. I don't begrudge that at all. I think that it's healthy. It's great. We need to also overlay that when you get here, our ability to govern, our desire to govern with an eye toward national security, with an eye toward competitiveness, with an eye toward protecting the personal privacy rights of individuals across this country. Those are the next steps in governing, and I trust that our colleagues are going to join with us and have those conversations in the future. Eric?
Just for the final point on it, is the ban of TikTok on the table, do you think? Is that something you could see happening in this Congress?
A variety of legislative proposals. You've seen some of those originate in the Senate even. I don't think anybody's closing any door at this point. I appreciate the thoughtfulness of members on both sides of the aisle that they undertook with this hearing. We look forward to the steps ahead, but I don't think any door's closed.
You also asked a question on the debt ceiling. I saw a letter from McCarthy today to the president asking for a meeting. The White House quickly responded that they want a clean debt ceiling. It seems like we're at a continued stalemate. Is there any creative solution from House Democrats on how to get us out of this?
Look, I think that what I saw out of the speaker's letter, out of Speaker McCarthy's letter, was a couple bullet points. Bullet points don't make a budget. And what we want to see out of House Republicans is what is your budget? What do you value? These are conversations that can and should be had when it comes to debts and deficits within the Budget Committee, with the Appropriations Committee. Those are healthy debates that we look forward to undertaking. I just left a hearing with generals and leaders in the defense world talking about just those proposals. How much does the Department of Defense need? What combatant command gets the resources? Those are important discussions that we need to have. What House Republicans are engaging in is just not responsible. They need to put their budget out. They need to tell us what they value, and that needs to be confined. But the full faith and credit of the United States government should not be in question. The United States pays its bills. We raised the debt limit 3 times under the previous administration. We should do that this time. Nothing's changed.
You all mentioned the prevalence of gun violence in this country. There's only so much you all can do. The majority you all can pass assault weapons ban, but that did not pass in the Senate. There's been a lot of things that you all want to do or say you'd like to do. What can you do in the minority? Is it taking a discharge petition, for example? And if so, what specifically could that look like? And could you get Republican support?
Well, first, we want to tell the people of Nashville, the first thing we can do is tell the people of Nashville that we need to do we need to do better. But we're with them and we're thinking about them. That's the first thing that we need to do. But from our public policy hat, as you mentioned, we passed the assault weapons ban here last year. We also passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which Leader Jeffries has said is a floor. It's not a ceiling. Investing resources into states, making sure that more extensive background checks for individuals under the age of 21. Those are good things that we were able to agree on. But clearly, there is more that can be done. I personally and many members of our caucus believe that the assault weapons ban would be the reasonable place to take action. We are not closing any door on any process or any legislation that will help communities, that will ensure the safety of Jennifer's kids coming home from school. Three of us up here, Seth has a baby and is going to be thinking through this in the next few years. But the rest of us have kids who were school age kids going to public schools. That's the mindset we think about this in, is how do we ensure our kids' safety? This is a fact that whether it's Maxwell Frost, coming to Congress, talking about gun violence, talking about how Newtown shaped him into public service. This is a generation that is more likely to spend time doing mass shooting drills than they are undertaking in other activities, and it's deeply unfortunate. And as a country and as a Congress, we can do better, and we know that. So shame on Speaker McCarthy for not bringing something up, for not announcing that we can and do more. All we're going to get are thoughts and prayers out of their Twitter accounts, and that's not enough.
If I can follow up, Republicans this morning have been saying they would like to address this through mental health legislation. They haven't proposed anything, it seems like, or talking about necessarily, but what would you all ideally like to see on the mental health front that you could actually join with Republicans?
The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act put, I think, $500 million into mental health into our states. That's a good place to start. Again, as Leader Jeffries has said, that's a floor. It's not a ceiling. If they want to invest in mental health, that's great. What they can also do is they can pass a budget. They can work with us on funding government that will actually put those dollars out on the street, out into the states, so the states can effectuate that change. But they haven't proposed that, and they still have significant challenges in passing a budget. So I would encourage them to do that, and I'll yield to the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chairman Aguilar. So in answer to your questions, Republican from Tennessee, Tim Burchett, was recently asked about gun violence and what they're going to do to address it. And he said, quote, "We're not going to fix it." So House Republicans are not going to fix the problem of school shootings. Democrats have passed laws and will continue to do that to address school shootings and other gun violence, such as universal background checks. And in terms of the two parties, we're just not the same on this issue. At the same time, what we're seeing are Republicans trying to deal with issues that do nothing to protect kids in schools, right? You had in Florida a principal that was fired because they showed Michelangelo's masterpiece, David, to some students. You also had a sort of in Florida, what they're doing is students who feel uncomfortable can object to certain courses. And so a professor had to not teach a civil rights course because a student felt uncomfortable about the discussion of civil rights. Well, parents have the right to have their kids learn about art. They have the right to have their kids learn about civil rights. They have the right to have their kids learn about historical figures like Rosa Parks. None of that killed anyone or killed any kids. What kills kids are AR-15s.
Yeah, I'll just echo the point that Chair Aguilar made on the debt ceiling, which is that whether we pay our bills as a country, as we have for over 200 years, is a completely different conversation than what our budget priorities should be going forward. The paying of our bills, keeping our obligations as a nation, must be non-negotiable, as it has been for hundreds of years. However, we can have a debate, we can have a negotiation about what our revenue and our spending should look like going forward. But in any debate, in any negotiation, the first step is the two sides show their plans. President Biden came out with his plan weeks ago. We are still waiting for the Republican plan. And so for them to be asking for a negotiation when they haven't even presented their opening position is just theatrics. Show us the plan and then we can negotiate. Yeah, gun violence, I don't know how much more I can add beyond the eloquent words of the chair and the vice chair, but you know, I can tell you that in the Democratic caucus, there is a lot of energy to do something. And so, again, every avenue, every procedural avenue, I think is still on the table. And our hope is that we can find even just a handful of reasonable Republicans who are willing to stand up for their constituents instead of the gun companies. And it all comes back to money, right? Just like in the Polluters Over People Act, the Republicans who took more than $20 million from the oil and gas companies are putting oil and gas profits ahead of energy consumers and environmental protection. It is not a coincidence that the gun industry is pumping money into the campaign accounts of many of our Republican colleagues, and all that they can offer in the face of tragedy is, you know, a tweet with thoughts and prayers and not real action. Not a coincidence. So.
I want to reiterate that we can and we should walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to address the mental health crisis in this country. We have to address the gun violence crisis in this country. And we have to understand that they're linked. Every time there is a shooting, my son cries about going to school because he's afraid, is he going to come back? Is his sister going to come back? These active shooter drills that we put our children through traumatizes them because they often can't tell the difference between a drill and the real thing. That exacerbates a mental health crisis that was worsened during COVID. We have got to recognize that weapons of war are too prevalent in our streets. A child in my son's class killed himself accidentally using a gun as a prop in a video. Why wasn't that gun secured? We should be investing in making sure that there are gun safes and gun locks. We should be investing in addressing the root causes of gun crimes in our communities. That's what we need to do, and not choose between addressing mental health and addressing gun violence. We have to do both.
Next question. Despite all these concerns, you still have millions of students, teachers, administrators who have said time and time again they are scared of what's going to happen if their school is going to be the next one. You had House Republican leaders this morning still saying the same point that they brought up before, but the priority is not to politicize the issue and not to punish law-abiding citizens. What are your guys' response when this is the same response that Republicans come with almost every time that not just a school shooting happens, but a mass shooting happens?
Look, I think it was, 2012 was Newtown, right? I mean, anytime kids get gunned down in schools, it's tragic, it's terrible. That was really the point, I think, for a lot of us, where it was, if Congress is going to act, this is it. And the fact that they couldn't, the fact that the talking points Republicans use today are exactly the same that they used in December of 2012. It's alarming. It's disappointing. It's just sad. And that's just who the Republican Party is today. And, we can't shed a tear about it. We've just got to do better and do more. And I think that's what you see the Democratic caucus want to do. We want to lead on these efforts. We did in the last Congress. We know that we can in the future. We want to use every procedural, possible tool we can. Every way we'll send a letter. We'll do a petition. We'll do whatever we need to do in order to help. One, crystallize it for the American people, because ultimately House Republicans answer to the American people. That's an audience that we can speak to. I think tomorrow you'll see Whip Clark lead an effort of moms, congressional moms, who are fed up and want to take action. And they will be joined by many of us who are parents and who want to help. And so that's what more we can do. But we can't just be frustrated, by this. We've got to take action, and that's what House Democrats want to do. Thank you.